This is the Sunday morning service of First Baptist Church, Chillicothe.
Thank you, Joe. And welcome again. We're continuing in our study on the life of Christ, and we've been looking at some of the stories Jesus used to illustrate special truths to his disciples, to the followers, to those that would hear his teaching back in first century Israel. Jesus used a form of teaching known as a parable when he wanted to convey these truths to those in the audience. Now, a parable is a story that illustrates a spiritual truth by taking everyday, common, relatable things and using them as an illustration. They stand for something else, but he uses that as a way of teaching. It's a very popular way that Jesus used. And he used it frequently throughout the Gospels. And over the past few weeks, we've looked at a few of the parables, some of the more well-known ones. And this morning, we're going to look at another one of the parables. This one's found in Matthew chapter 25. Now, in Matthew 24 and 25, Jesus gives what is known as the Olivet Discourse. It's a fancy name for his teaching. It comes from the fact he was sitting on the hillside on the Mount of Olives, and he was teaching. And in Matthew 24 and 25, he speaks primarily about his return, the judgment, the things that will happen at the end times, but judgment as well. And the parable we're going to look at this morning has a sense of judgment in it. Our parable's found in Matthew 25, beginning at verse 14, and it is commonly referred to as the parable of the talents. Luke's gospel has a very similar parable, but it has a little different application, a little different meaning. So this morning we're going to look at Matthew's account. So It is in Matthew chapter 25, and we will begin in verse 14. For it is just like a man about to go out on a journey, who called his own slaves and entrusted his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his own ability, and he went on his journey. Jesus begins with a continuation about the discussion that he started at the first of the chapter. When he says, "For it is," he's referring back to the kingdom. That's what he's been teaching about. And this parable is going to instruct his disciples and the other hearers about a truth of the kingdom. And he sets this parable up by explaining and giving us the situation. We have this man who is getting ready to leave. He's called the master. He's going on a journey, and he's going to give some of his possessions to his servants or his slaves, depending on what translation you have. He gives them to them while he is gone. Now, there's not a specific time frame given here, since Matthew uses journey. In other words, it's a longer time period than just a short trip, an overnight trip. And it's an open-ended time frame. It says no idea how long he's going to be gone. Nobody knows when he might come back. And until he returns, he has these things he wants his servants to take care of, to tend to watch over, to keep safe until he gets back. Now, that's not an unusual request. Many of us face that if we go out of town or go away for any extended period of time. We've all had to do that. You got to get somebody to watch your house, somebody to feed your animals, somebody to water your plants or get your mail in, or just keep an eye on things while you're gone. So we understand what's going on here. Entrusting is the word that Jesus uses here, and the idea is one of complete faith and trust. The definition of entrust is to commit to another with confidence. You have confidence that what you give or entrust will be taken care of. This man's preparing to leave, so he entrusts some of his possessions. And he gives to 3 different servants 3 different amounts, which it says he dispenses based on their individual abilities. The scriptures say he gave a talent. Now, a talent back in Jesus' day was a measure of weight, and it was also an amount of money. And from this parable, we will see that he's referring to money. It's usually represented by an amount of silver. 1 talent was worth a lot. It was a good deal of money. If you remember our parable last week, we were talking about the workers in the vineyard who were paid a denarius, which was the pay for 1 day's work. A talent was worth about 6,000 of those. So a talent was maybe worth 20 to 30 years worth of labor. It was a large amount of money. What the man was entrusting here wasn't pocket change. It was a substantial amount. And he gave each servant a different amount, and then he set out on his journey. What they did with what they were given is the point of the parable. So let's see what happens. Continuing on in Matthew 25, verse 16. Immediately the one who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and gained 5 more talents. In the same manner, the one who had received the 2 talents gained 2 more. But he who received the 1 talent went away and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. The first man responds immediately to what he had been given. Note, he quickly puts the gift to use. He traded with it. In other words, he took it and he was involved in some type of commerce. He invested it. He made some kind of a business transaction with it. And he's able to double what he received. He used what he had been given to the benefit of the master. If you notice, the master didn't give him any instructions. He simply trusted they would be faithful to do with what they were given, to use it properly. He didn't give them any specific instructions. He merely trusted the gifts to them. And this first man went right to work, and he was able to gain more. You know, it wasn't really his, it was something he had been entrusted with. The gift was given to him to do something with. He was expected to keep it safe until the master returned. He doesn't know how long he's going to be gone. So he immediately puts it to work. He doesn't wait around because he doesn't know when the guy's coming back. And I'd say he did pretty well. He got a 100% return on his investment. That's a good investment on your money, 100% back. The second servant had been given 2 talents. In verse 17, it says he did the same thing in the same manner. He immediately put it to work and he gained 2 more. Good returns again, another 100% return on the investment. Now the actual amounts are different, 5 and 2, but the amount of return is the same. They both doubled what the master had given them. And now we get to the third servant who had been given 1 talent. Verse 18 says, this servant went and put the money in a hole in the ground. He didn't put it to use. He hid the master's money. And there it sat in the hole he had dug. 3 different servants, 3 different amounts, 2 different attitudes of what to do with them. 2 servants used what they had received. 1 did not. 1 hid it. Now the master comes back, and he is demanding an accounting from his servants. Verse 19, now after a long time the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. The one who had received the 5 talents came up and brought 5 more talents, saying, Master, you entrusted 5 talents to me. See, I have gained 5 more talents. He's back to settle accounts. He goes to the first guy that was given something, who was given 5. He took 5 and he gained 5 more. He's doubled the money. And the servant explains that he understood what the situation was. You have entrusted. You have given to me with confidence, and I responded appropriately. There doesn't seem to be any concern with this guy about what he was supposed to do with it. He just acted on faith. And he took the talents and he used them to the benefit of the master. And then his master said to him, Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Verse 21 gives us the response. Well done, good and faithful servant. What a way to be spoken to. Can you imagine how that would feel if someone came up to you and told you, well done, something you have done pleased someone. It was well done. You were faithful in what you've done. I hope everybody here's had that experience at some time in their life. The job you did was well done, and it brought pleasure to the master, to the boss, to the parent, whoever it might be. You ever had that happen? You know the feeling. It feels good. And he is given a promise of future benefit because of his faithfulness with what his master calls a few things, which in the case of our story is not really a few things. If a talent was worth 20 to 30 years of a daily salary, and this guy's got 5, that's maybe 150 years of wages. It's a vast amount. But the master says it's a small amount. Now, if 150 years of daily wages is a small amount, can you imagine what the gift coming that the master refers to as more or many might be? Incredible. Vast resources of some sort. And Jesus says that the master invites him to enter into the joy of your master. The master's joyful over the servant's use of what he was given. It pleases the master to see what the servant has done, and he tells him to enter into the joy, to rejoice as well. It's a wonderful reckoning when this man gives an account. And verses 22 and 23 give us the account of the second man. Also, the one who had received the 2 talents came up and said, Master, you entrusted 2 talents to me. See, I have gained 2 more talents. And his master said to him, Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Very similar. He took what he had been given, he doubled it, got that 100% return. And he's told the same thing. His faithfulness with a few things will result in his being given many more things. And he too is invited to enter into the master's joy. Now, it isn't surprising that these guys received similar praise and a similar promise. They both did essentially the same thing. They doubled the money. They both took what was entrusted to them, and they did something positive with it. And now we get to the third guy. Remember him? He went out in the backyard, dug a hole, stuffed the money in there, and let's see how the master responds to him. Verse 24. And the one also who had received the 1 talent came up and said, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. And I was afraid, and went away and hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is yours. He confesses what he did. But of course, he has a rationalization for why he did it. It is amazing how we as humans can find ways to rationalize things. If we put our mind to it, we can rationalize just about anything we do. And here the man rationalizes why he dug the hole and hid the money. He viewed the master as a stern and hard man. He actually accuses him here of reaping where he didn't sow and gathering where he hadn't scattered seed. And that has brought a great fear to this man. He confesses he's afraid of what might happen. What if he didn't make good use of it? What if he invested it and his investment failed and he lost it? He's scared. The other 2 invested, they were faithful to do something with it. This man he's paralyzed by his fear, so he's just not going to do anything. You know, what if he'd made a bad business decision and he didn't have anything to return? He seems to lack confidence, and fear had clouded and directed his response. And the master's response to his confession begins in verse 26. But the master answered and said to him, You wicked, lazy slave, you knew that I reap where I did not sow, and gather where I scattered no seed. Calls him wicked and lazy. To be lazy here is to be unfaithful. If the servant viewed his master the way he described him, is that harsh and demanding of a person, as someone who reaped where he didn't sow and gathered where he didn't spread any seed, he should have been at least faithful to use what had been given to him. But he wasn't. He dug a hole and he hid it. He did not put it to use at all. He didn't even try. His fear said, I'm just going to hide it. I'm not going to use it at all. He gives the master 0 return. And the master informs him that his behavior, how he handled what he has been given, was not acceptable. The master tells him, he says, then you ought to have put my money in the bank, and on my arrival I would have received my money back with interest. He could have at least put it in the bank and got a little money on it. If the servant knew and understood the master to be that kind of a man, very hard, very demanding, with very rigid laws and things that he needed to follow, he surely would have realized he would incur the displeasure if he didn't do anything. His fear had led him to not want to lose what he had been given, but it also prevented him from using it for anything. Now, we don't know what the interest rates were back then, and we don't know how long the man was, but remember, 1 talent was 20 or 30 years of wages. It's a good chunk of money. It had made something. The master says, why don't you at least put it in the bank? I could have got a little bit of interest on it. I could have done something if you had just done something with it. You could have earned something. The fact that the servant was so unfaithful that he refused to use the resources that he had been given results in a different response from the master. Remember, the first 2 were commended for their use of what they had been given, and they were given a promise of more things to come. The third servant is condemned, and instead of a promise of more, he receives nothing. In verse 28, the master says, therefore take away the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. Take it away and give it to the one with 10. That seems terribly unfair to us when we look at it. But as we've seen repeatedly in Jesus' teachings, and especially in the parables, fairness is not normally the issue. The issue is faithfulness. The issues are righteousness and justice, not fairness as we as humans look at fairness. The guy had refused to use what he had been given for whatever reason that might be. In this case, it seems to be fear. He's afraid to do anything. He's afraid that he's not going to be successful. And so what he was given was taken away. We see faithfulness of the first 2. They faithfully did something with it. They acted. They were entrusted with something. They had confidence. They had faith that they could take it and use it. This man has no confidence, and he doesn't have any faith that he can do anything with it. And now the master explains how he handles those to whom he entrusts things in verse 29. For to everyone who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he does have shall be taken away. Those who have here are the 2. What do they have? They have confidence. They use faithfulness. Those are the qualities that they possess. The third man, the hole-in-the-ground guy, lacks those things. He does not have confidence. He does not act on faith. Those who have the qualities will be given more, according to their own abilities. Those who do not have the qualities will have those things removed. And finally, the pronouncement of what the third man could expect. Remember, the first 2 were promised even more. Look what happens to this guy. Verse 30, throw out the worthless slave into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. He is cast out. He is removed from the presence of the master. That's his final destination. The parable of talents has application for our lives today. As we've seen over the past few weeks, the parables are used to teach spiritual truth by taking common, everyday, relatable things and having them stand for something much deeper. As you probably figured out, the master is God. The servants stand for mankind. And the talents stand for resources. not merely money that come from God. The parable illustrates a God who equips and gives to people, and then what their reaction to those gifts is. Now, the talents that Jesus referred to back in that day were actual amounts of money, but they also stand for the things that God gives. Their exact worth wasn't determined except to say they were of large value. And the talents represent resources that come from God. The Scripture is full of passages that talk about God's giving to us. In James chapter 1, James says, "Every good thing given in every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father." God supplies us in so many different ways. For those who have a relationship with God this morning, think about that in your own life. There are a variety of things we receive from God. The word talents in our contemporary language usually refers to special abilities or things that each one of us has been given. When I use the word resources, I'm including all of that stuff. We are all unique. We are all gifted differently, both spiritually and humanly gifted with different talents, different resources. God has provided those gifts, and what we do with them is up to us. Have you ever known someone who had a great talent and refused to use it? We used to see that some with the girls we had in foster care. We would see someone who had tremendous artistic ability or tremendous music ability, but the events and things that had happened in their life led them to hide those things. That was part of the challenge, drawing that out, getting them to use them, encouraging them to use the gifts that they'd been given. You may know people in your life that you see and think, what a waste of talent. Somebody has this gift and they're not using it. The church is full of people who have been gifted and who have been provided resources in a variety of ways. And some people use what they have been given to serve the master, and others choose to just sit back and sit on the things that they have been given. There's a lot of reasons for that. Maybe people think they just can't serve effectively with what they're given. Maybe they don't want to use their gifting because they look at someone else and think they're more gifted in the same area. I can't possibly compete with that. Think back to the parable. Man is given 5 talents. Another guy's given just 2. He doesn't look at the man with 5 and say, well, God, he's got 5. I can't do anything with my 2. He takes the 2 that he is given and he uses it. He takes what he is given. He doesn't compare it to somebody else. He takes it and he uses it to serve the master. He didn't let the amount of the resources he was given control what he did with them. He took whatever it was that God had given him and he put it to use, and that's how it should be. Nobody sitting here this morning is equipped or gifted the same as anybody else. We are all equipped, we are all gifted differently. And it's not just limited, it includes everything. It's not just financial, or it's not just spiritual or human talents. Everyone is gifted differently. And God has brought us together here in this local church with our varying gifts and our varying resources to serve Him in this place, at this time, with the things that He has given us. If we will faithfully use what God has given us, what He has made available to us, we will be like the first 2 men. they were given the promise of much more to come. In our parable, those men represent the faithful believers who use the things that God has given them and take them and put them to use. In the context of Matthew 24 and 25, the overview of that is Jesus is talking about when He returns and the things that will happen in the judgments. And here we have examples of two people who were faithful to use what they'd been given. Those will receive much more. They enter the kingdom. Think about the guy that dug the hole. He looked at the master, he looked at God, and remember how he described him? He said, you reap where you don't sow, you gather where you didn't scatter. You're a hard man. For whatever reason, this man chose not to use the talent he was given. He was not faithful. He didn't have any confidence. He didn't take what the master entrusted to him and put it to use. And in the end, what happened? He was cast out. There are people like that all over the world. They look at God. They look at the things God has given, the gifts that He has given, including the greatest gift of all, that He sent His Son who died on the cross for our sins and rose from the dead. And they look at that gift and they say, I don't like the way you do things. I don't like that. I don't like that you have standards. And that gift that you have given, I'm going to choose to ignore it. I don't want anything to do with it. They don't think they need to do anything with the gift. And in the end, they're going to find themselves on the outside. The man who received the one talent, who chose not to be faithful, who chose to ignore what he had been given from God, ends up on the outside. He's cast out. He represents the unbelieving world. When people look at God, they see this is how He operates, and there are people who don't like the way He does stuff, and they choose to ignore Him. Others look at God and choose to be faithful and use the things that He has given each one of us. You know, there's plenty of people in the unbelieving world with tremendous talents, tremendous resources, but they're not using them faithfully to serve the Master. In the end, it is the faithfulness and confidence in the giver of the gifts that is the thing that is important. As we conclude this morning, I'd like you to take a moment and just think about how God has gifted you. What resources, what talents has He given you? Everybody in here is different. And we may have someone who has a talent of 5 and a talent of 2, and it's the same talent. But in the story, they used what they were given. They don't compare them to each other. They take what God has given them and they use it. Are you taking what God has given to you and using it to serve the Master? Like the guy with 5 or the guy with 2, or are you acting like the guy with 1 and just sitting on it? Remember the 2 ways the Master looked at him? To one He said, "Well done, good and faithful servant." To the other man, He said, "You wicked and lazy slave," and He cast him out. We don't know when the Master will return, but one day He will return. Which of those would you like to hear when He returns? We'd all like to hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant."